right. Yes. Welcome back. Welcome back to the road trip. I told you it was far from being over, y'all. We're not done. Welcome back, Kingdom Builders. Welcome back, road trippers. Welcome back, everyone. Akeem and Akatim. Brothers and sisters. Right? Mothers and fathers, aunties and uncles, grandmas and grandpas, everybody. Shalom. Shalom. Peace and blessings to you and your homes and all of yours, right? All your loved ones, right? Your children and your pets, little fur babies. It's good to see you. All right. And all praises to the Most High. All praises to the Most High. Abba, right? Abba na Yahweh. Abba na Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. Right? Glory to Yahweh Shai. Honors to the Ruach. My love and my respect to you. It's good to see y'all. Hope you had a really, really nice Shabbat, and was able to relax and, get some things done if need be. But, hope it was peaceful. So here we are. Okay, dipping in. There we go. Cool. So we're looking at the works of Josephus, right? Flavius Josephus. And so we're going to start getting into this. What do you think about that? All right. I'm still waiting on getting some of their other books, more of the Pseudepigrapha, Second Baruch, things like that, So in the meantime, we're going to do some reading over here just to stay busy, right? And for more edification. Okay, so I think it'd be a good idea for us to get started with the introduction. All right, naturally, we'll start reading about this introduction. Give us a little bit of context about the beginning of this. It's a pretty long book, by the way, too. It's pretty heavy, man. Looking at about 1,000 pages to get, some more dialogue here. So let's go ahead and read this introduction. And, yeah. All right. No further ado. Here we go. Let's begin on this new Road Trip 2.0 journey. The book of Flavius Josephus. All right. The introduction of the book. Let's begin. The introduction reads, Josephus was a first-century Yahudi whose life as a diplomat, general, and historian was crammed with contradictions. He studied in the desert but wrote in the city. He was a pacifist who went to war, a military commander who, to our knowledge, had no training in the martial arts but fought as if he had. He battled the Romans, yet was befriended by them. He joined a suicide pact but survived. While 39 lay dead around him, he was the mortal foe of a future emperor, who later brought him into the family. Schooled in Aramaic, he wrote a massive history in Greek for a Roman audience, writings which have either been disdained or called next to the Bible in importance. Many of the historical works that he used have perished, but his own have survived. He was scorned by his fellow Yahudim, but honored by Christians. He has been labeled a traitor, quisly, lackey, or banal, opportunist on the one hand, as well as a survivor, prodigy, sage, and indispensable source on the other. His exploits and achievements, pulsing with paradox, are discussed as much today as they were 19 centuries ago. Beyond all debate over Josephus as bane or blessing is the commanding importance of the first century Yahudim historian. Aside from references to scripture itself, the phrase, according to Josephus, is the single most familiar refrain in biblical and intertestamental scholarship. It is safe to say that if Josephus had not written, or if his writings had not survived, every biblical reference book, dictionary, encyclopedia, or commentary in our libraries today would occupy far less space on the stacks, and our knowledge of the biblical world would be impoverished. We would have little knowledge of the intertestamental era, and only a small fraction of our present information on Herod the Great, Archelaus, Herod Antipas, or the Herod Agrippas 1 and 2. Facts about Annas, Caiaphas, and the priestly families that controlled the Jerusalem temple in Yahushai's day, Salake. And Yahushai's day would be blurred, as would the politics of Pontius Pilate, Felix, Festus, and the other Roman governors in Palestine, some of who would not even be known by name. We would never know that the dancing daughter of Herodias, who secured the decapitation of John the Baptist, was named Salome, and most of the details concerning the Roman destruction of Jerusalem would have perished as well. The list could go on and on. The writings of Josephus then provide a vital political, topographical, economic, social, intellectual, and religious supplement to our biblical information, a crucial context for comparing, interpreting, and above all, extending our knowledge of the times. Let one example suffice. The first Christian bishop of Jerusalem was clearly James, the half-brother of Yahushai, see Acts 15. One might assume that the New Testament would offer more information on so important a figure, including the circumstances of his death. It does not. Josephus, on the other hand, provides the details about how the high priest, along with the Sanhedrin, had James stoned to death in 62 AD, under circumstances that form a significant parallel to Yahushai's crucifixion 29 years earlier. Yahushai himself is referred to in two famous passages in Josephus's Antiquities, 18.3.63 and 20.9.200. The former most probably interpolated, but now restored to what was likely its original form. A brief survey of the Jewish historian's life and writings follows, as well as a critique of his historiography, and this translation by William Whitson. All right, that's the first part of that. Let's continue on. We'll read the next little portion. Says the life of Josephus. So we're going to read that and kind of just get some more context. All right, and this is broken down into chapters, it seems, but that's not until the writings of Josephus. Okay, we're getting ready to read about the life of Josephus. Stand by. The life of Josephus, and it reads, in terms of his future career in authorship, Flavius Josephus could not have arrived in this world at a better time or place. In the year 37 AD, 4 years after Yahushai was crucified, Josephus was born in Jerusalem as Yosef bar Mattathayahu in Aramaic, or Ben Mattathias in Hebrew, the son of a priestly family on both sides. His mother could trace her ancestry to the royal Hasmoneus, the Maccabean family dynasty who had led the struggle for Jewish independence prior to the Roman conquest. He had one older brother named Matthias. Further details on the life of Josephus derive both from a brief autobiography he wrote later in life, the Vita or Life, as well as the references he makes to his own role as commander in the Jewish war. Much of this information is defensive in nature and hardly objective or impartial. A precocious lad, Josephus received an excellent education and later claimed that when he was 14, the Jerusalem priests regularly came to him for information regarding the laws. This may well be questioned, however, in views of the young prodigy. Amazing, his teacher's motif paralleled not only in Yahushai's famous case, reference Luke 2 and 41, but in those of Alexander the Great, Augustus, the others, and that Josephus was quite impressed with himself, however, is solid fact. A conceit that would be impossible in a writer today, but was common enough in the ancient world, as witness the self-accolades of Cicero, Horace, and others. From ages 16 to 19, according to his autobiography, Josephus experimented with the various Jewish sects in order to choose the best, finally deciding on the Pharisees as most attuned to the people. In an apparent chronological conflict, however, Josephus also states that he spent these 3 years with a desert ascetic named Banus. a period that ended when he was 19. Possibly his surveys of the religious parties of his day and his sojourn with the hermit happened simultaneously. The next 7 years are silent in his memoirs. In 64 AD, when he was 26, Josephus sailed to Rome on a mission to secure the release of some Jewish priests who were imprisoned there after the Roman governor Felix had sent them to Nero for trial on some insignificant offense. En route, Josephus and some 600 others were shipwrecked on the Adriatic Sea, but he was among 8 swimmers who survived when rescued by a ship sailing from Cyrene. This, the first in a series of harrowing escapes for Josephus, occurred several years after Paul had encountered a similar disaster on the open Mediterranean. Remember that, when Paul was shipwrecked? Yep, very similar. Through the help of the Jewish actor named Alituras and Poppaea Sabina, Nero's empress, who was interested in Judaism, the Yahudim religion. Josephus' mission was successful. This probably took place before July of 64, when the Great Fire burned much of Rome. The grandeur of the imperial capital must have convinced Josephus that Rome could never be defeated in war by Jewish forces, and he returned home as an advocate for peace, a policy affirmed also by Herod Agrippa II and his sister Bernice. They were not successful in deterring war when the Jewish revolt broke out in 66 AD. Josephus, in another ironic twist, became commander of the Jewish forces in Galilee, although in his life he also portrayed his Galilean mission as that of a mediator to placate war hawks in Galilee. Both roles would have suited this paradoxical personality, Josephus, the pacifist warrior. In any case, the Galilean command was very strategic in views of Vespasian's decisions to attack Palestine from the north. In the months before the Roman invasion, Josephus reorganized the administration of Galilee, fortified its strongholds, laid up provisions, and trained its armies of 65,000 troops. When the Romans advanced, however, much of Josephus' army deserted, and he withdrew inside the fortress of Jotapata, to which Vespasian promptly laid siege. For 47 days, Josephus defended the city through vicious and various devices, pouring boiling oil onto the heads of the attackers, stuffing sacks of cushion that impact of the battering rams, and burning their siege works. But the Romans inevitably broke through the walls and conquered Jotapata. But where was Josephus? With 40 others, he was hiding in a large cave whose opening was concealed in the side of a deep pit. When the Romans discovered them, the Jewish refugees opted for suicide rather than fall into the hands of the pagan Gentiles. Josephus objected to the plan until swords at his throat convinced him otherwise, and a chain of mutual slaughter ensued. After 39 lay dead, Josephus and one other man were left, whether by fortune or by providence of Yahweh. He would later write, or by the stratagems of Josephus. We would quickly add, the group probably drew straws, and Josephus held. In any case, the two surrendered to the Romans and were brought before Vespasian, whose associates recommended a quick execution. Josephus merely predicted that both Vespasian and his son Titus would soon become emperors in place of Nero. For this inspired prophecy, read shrewd forecast. Josephus gained imprisonment rather than death. And when months later Nero committed suicide, 3 successor Caesars were killed, and Vespasian's legions proclaimed him emperor. The Romans deemed Josephus a true prophet, freed him from his bonds, and awarded him a privileged status from then on. He accompanied Vespasian to Alexandria, from which the general set sail for Rome to assume the imperial purple, while Josephus himself returned to the siege of Jerusalem with Vespasian's son Titus. For the rest of the war, he served as an intermediary and interpreter between the Roman and Jewish forces, well rewarded by the former, but cursed by the latter, as a turncoat. In fairness, this lucky opportunist was much more a survivor than a traitor, and his continual calls to his countrymen to surrender and avoid the destruction of Jerusalem and its temples proved tragically to be excellent advice. When Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, Josephus might have remained in Judea, rewarded as he was by the Romans with a tract of land near Jerusalem, some sacred books, the release of his friends, including his brother, and other favors. He chose instead to accompany the victorious Titus to Rome, where he received Roman citizenship, an apartment in Vespasian's former mansion on the Quirinal, and an annual pension to underwrite his literary endeavors. Salake. His relationship as client to the Flavian imperial family was so close that he could be renamed Flavius Josephus, and he remained in the good graces of all three emperors in that dynasty: Vespasian, 69 to 79, Titus, 79 to 81, and his brother Domitian, 81 to 96. Josephus states that the first two read and commended his Jewish war, while Domitian awarded tax-free status to his estates in Judea. Of the three, he was closest to Titus and gives him a heroic portrayal in the Jewish war. Josephus's domestic life, about which we have little information, was less successful, partially due to a life lived in the extremes. He was married 4 times, once briefly at the command of Vespasian, and while a prisoner, he had 3 sons by his third wife, whom he married at Alexandria, 2 of whom preceded Josephus in death, while the third, Hyrcanus, apparently outlived him. After divorcing her, he not pleased with her conduct, Josephus married his last wife, a Jewess of nobility from Crete, by whom he had 2 sons, Justus and Simonides, Agrippa. Further information on Josephus's life in Rome is scanty, but clearly it was given over to massive literary endeavors with ready access to governmental archives, imperial memoirs, and libraries, public or private. A wealthy patron named Epaphroditus must have subsidized these endeavors, since 3 of Josephus's works are dedicated to him. Although his identity is unknown, Epaphroditus may have been the literary scholar who lived at Rome in the second half of the 1st century and had a library of 30,000 volumes, which Josephus could well have used, either before or after his death. Josephus's statue was erected in Roman Forum. It has not been discovered, and he must have died sometime after 100 AD, the usual date for the death of Agrippa II, who was deceased at the time of the life was written. Some scholars, however, place Agrippa's death earlier. That's the end of the life of Josephus, that little part of the introduction right there. We're going to continue on to another part of the introduction called the writings of Josephus, okay? Let's continue on. All right. Hallelujah. All right. Let's read a little bit more. All right, so we're still in the introduction, and this is going to be called the writings of Josephus, and it reads: Josephus left a vast literary legacy written in this order: the Jewish War, Jewish Antiquities, the Life, and Against Apion. All are presented in this volume, but the order of the first 3 is reversed for chronological purposes. Equally as impressive as the size of this corpus is its survival. Many ancient sources never reached the age of printing through loss of manuscripts or failure to recopy them. Nicholas of Damascus, for example, one of Josephus's major sources on Herod the Great, wrote a universal history in 144 books, of which we have only traces today preserved in the writings of others. The works of the greatest Roman imperial historian Cornelius Tacitus contain gaping lacunae, the whole lost books, that the massive Josephine texts have come down to us virtually intact. with only a small string of verses missing in the antiquities concerning Israelite kings, borders on the miraculous. Even if this survival can be explained apart from the supernatural, why Jewish scholars in earlier centuries ignored Josephus as a turncoat, their Christian counterparts carefully preserved his texts, most probably because of their intertestamental information and their many correlations with New Testament places, events, and personalities such as Pontius Pilate, John the Baptist, Yahushua, and James the Just of Jerusalem. To be sure, as with the Bible, there are considerable textual variations among the 133 surviving manuscripts of some or all of Josephus's works. The Jewish War, okay, this is the first manuscript, kind of just number 1, and it reads, "The Jewish War was the first of his literary endeavors. The title in the Greek means literally, concerning the Jewish war. This is the proper translation and not as Whitson had it, the wars of the Jews, the Yahudim. This account in 7 books is more than General Josephus's battle diary, since it begins in the Maccabean era and proceeds through the fall of Jerusalem to that of Masada in 73 AD. Although the author did not date his work, scholars conclude that it must have appeared later in Vespasian's administration, 76 to 79 AD, since Caecina, a Roman commander, has a negative portrayal in Jewish War 4.11.634-44. Originally a supporter of Vespasian, Caecina was later executed by Titus for conspiracy. The final book 7 of the Jewish War may not have been written until the reign of Domitian, who comes off very favorably in its pages after being almost completely overlooked in the first 6 books. In the prologue, Josephus states that he first wrote the Jewish War in his own tongue, likely Aramaic rather than Hebrew, and then used assistants to translate it into Greek. This help must have been considerable according to Lewis H. Feldman, since very few Aramaisms or Hebraisms remain in our Greek text, which is written in an excellent Greek style, far superior to that of Antiquities, which was completed more than a decade later. The original Aramaic version was intended to caution a relationship in Babylonia and Parthia, not to attempt a rebellion against the Roman Empire, but the work had a much broader purpose and audience in Greek, to correct earlier versions of the war that Josephus found faulty or prejudiced, and to record for posterity what truly happened. In detailing Roman military might, it would further serve as a consolation to those defeated by Rome. In the Greek version of the Jewish War, Josephus had a Gentile leadership in mind, as is obvious in the explaining of Jewish institutions as the Passover, Pentecost, and other festivals. To such Greek and Roman leaders, he portrayed the Yahudim as peace-loving people, not insurrectionists, but were misled by the small number of insurgent zealots and should therefore not be branded with any war guilt or misunderstood as rebels. The Greek edition, however, also targeted a general Jewish readership, since a majority of Yahudim in the Mediterranean world were Greek-speaking. To them, Josephus portrayed Yahweh as moving over to the Roman side in the war as punishment for the evils inflicted on the Yahudim by their zealot leaders. At various points in his writings, Josephus clearly identifies his sources. For the Jewish war, these included the memoirs of Vespasian and Titus, conversations with Agrippa II, who also read and approved his text, a wise woman survivor at Masada, and his own eyewitness experiences and involvement. From the Roman campaign in Galilee to the siege and destruction of Jerusalem, and even to the triumphal parade in Rome, with its elaborate floats, Josephus was there for much of it. Although, during his imprisonment at Caesarea, he would have to have relied on reports from the battlefront, conditions inside Jerusalem he claimed to have learned from Jewish prisoners, including his own brother, whose release he was able to secure. While Josephus does not announce his own biases, and what author does? They are readily apparent in the text, and he does nothing to disguise them. The cause of the war he attributes primarily to the Jewish revolutionaries and their demagogic leaders, whose subsequent internal strife also doomed Jerusalem and the Jewish cause. He might have said more about the messianic factor in Roman anti-Semitism. Some of these warlords, like John of Geshkala, were also rival antagonists of Josephus, and so were drenched in his vitriol. Most prominent among the heroes, of course, was Titus, the wise champion, who even urged that Jerusalem temple be spared, a claim doubted by many historians, but it would be too simplistic to claim that turncoat Josephus wrote a book in which the Romans could do no wrong and the Yahudim no right. Plenty of Jewish virtues, right, and Roman vices are also exposed. The Jewish war, and one of the most despicable characters to appear in its pages, is the final Roman governor of Judea, a wretch named Gessius Florus. All right. Let's finish up this first manuscript, and then we'll come back on the next one. All right, and it reads: As in the case of biblical sources, Josephus has been subject to both justifiable criticism as well as a vast amount of critical nitpicking. The famous Masada episode that closes the Jewish war is a case in point. A revisionist debate rages today over Josephus's reportage, and discrepancies are claimed between his record and recent archaeology. Herod's palace is actually on the northern, not western edge of Masada, and its columns are drummed, not monolithic. Yigiel Yadin, the principal archaeologist, found 11 ostraca with inscribed names, but Josephus wrote that 10 were chosen as executioners in the suicide pact. He also found only 25 skeletons at Masada, whereas Josephus wrote that 960 defenders had committed suicide. Josephus himself was not at Masada, nor did he ever visit it, to our knowledge, but rather derived his account from one of two women survivors. To cavil between numbers like 10 and 11 would seem pedantic, although 25 versus 960 is more serious. Overlooked, of course, is the fact that the Romans practiced cremation, not inhumation. And the first thing that victorious Romans would have done at Masada would have been to burn the bodies of the defenders to avoid the horrendous stench. Burial in that unforgiving rock would have been impossible. All the other details in Jewish war regarding Masada correlate admirably with the archaeological and topographical record. The precise location, the snake path up the hill, the encompassing Roman siege wall, and still visible walls of the legendary camps, and the great western invasion ramp, as well as dozens of other particulars. A Slavonic version of the Jewish war exists, but it has so many sensationalizing accretions to the standard text that most scholars deem it a highly colored translation and paraphrase from the Greek edition, not the original Aramaic. That's the end of the first manuscript, and we'll end it right there, and we'll come back on the second manuscript of the introduction of the writings of Josephus. All right, cool. Thanks for being with me, y'all, Kingdom Builders, Road Trippers. I'll see you all soon, man. Please be safe out there in your travels to and fro, all right? And you know the drill, all praises to the Most High. All right, I love you. Yeah.